Hi, everyone. I'm Stephen W. Long. This is The Writing Life, and so pleased today to have Betty Adams with us again. Betty was here before with a short story. This time, your first book is out, and Dying Embers. Is that right?
Yeah.
So
it was out last time too, but.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
We just didn't talk about it.
I had a copy of it.
Oh, okay. All right. Betty, I wanted to start with your profession, and I know what it is, but kind of tell people, and then I have a follow-up.
Well, the profession I went to college for is scientist.
Okay.
I've got my Bachelor's of Science in General Biology with a wildlife ecology focus.
Okay.
And that qualifies me for a range of different jobs. Currently, I'm doing botany at Crater Lake National Park.
Okay. And I was going to say botanist, but it's really broader than that.
Yes, I've done fisheries, I've done ornithology.
Oh, okay.
This year it's botany.
Okay, this year. Now, so my follow-up is, does that, and if so, how, does it inform your writing?
There are ridiculously more numerous description of plants in my writing than there really needs to be. And I do write science fiction.
Okay.
And a lot of the stories that I write are based on an ecological mindset, how people and how organisms interact with their environment. And it informed my novel, but it probably plays into my short comedic stories.
Okay.
The general theme of those is just the absurdity of human existence, where these sapient creatures interacting with a non-sapient world. And the question that went into my comedic stories was, how would that same absurdity of existence come into play when dealing with other sapient creatures?
Oh my gosh. Okay.
And so I created a variety of 6 different aliens for this universe that I'm playing around in.
Okay. And again, this is your short stories?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And I've gotten good response from my beta readers on that. And hopefully I'll be putting them into a book this winter. But yeah, when you take an organism and it's in its environment, that's kind of a creature in stasis. It's doing its thing. The story happens when something changes in that environment. And I've had no shortage of stories, because all you have to do is take this human creature and alter its environment, or take one of the aliens and put a human in, which is a major alteration in that environment. Right. And the stories just sort of generate themselves.
You know what's so interesting about that? I mean, lots of things, but the thing that strikes me is that Joseph Campbell talks about the hero's journey, and the story starts in what he calls the ordinary world. And so you know about that. You're shaking your head.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, well, and that's exactly what you've done.
And then comes the call to action.
The call to action. Well, good for you. You know that. And by the way, I love you said that it's heavy on the description of the plants, but I think that's terrific, because we can learn something, for one thing. I mean, it fills out the story, it makes it richer, but also we can actually learn something. So does that play into, and I know just a little bit about Dying Embers. I went to the site and read a little bit. One of the characters is the progenitor of an alien or aliens. Have I got that right?
Yes, sort of. That aspect of the story I based on the concept that many animals will imprint on another species.
Okay.
Because every organism has certain survival mechanisms in its brain that helps it grow from the original stage, the infant stage, to a mature adult. And in every social species that we know of, everything from trees to elephants, the young of the species need the older members of the species there to modulate their growth. With the sequoias down in California.
I was going to ask about that. This is, you've taken a leap here.
Yeah, with the sequoias down in California, the young trees grow up underneath the canopy of their older trees. There has to be a breach in the canopy.
Okay.
But we know that when you just go out and take a flat area that's been clear cut and then put a bunch of trees in there, they don't grow the same.
Really?
And we can make them grow to our specifications, so we might think they're growing better, but over long term, the ecosystem isn't as stable. And if you walk outside on a cold day and you walk under one of these big Douglas fir trees, one of the first things you'll notice is that under the canopy, it's going to be several degrees warmer.
Okay.
And that's just one aspect. And then, of course...
Now, this is so interesting to me. I wasn't going to go here, but this is great. So, is it warmer because it's sheltered? It cuts the wind?
There are so many factors.
Okay.
But the primary deciding factor that makes it warmer in the winter and cooler in the summer was something that my academic advisor just drilled into us. We had an entire test that was based around this concept. It's the water.
Okay.
The water in the tree, because a tree is a giant water reservoir. People spend thousands of dollars to build in the city to build a water reservoir, and because the city wants so many of them to prevent flooding. But they determined that if you plant a conifer tree, once it grows to maturity, I mean, you've spent 10 cents on a seed, and then its upkeep, it has the same water trapping capacity.
My goodness.
As one of these big, complicated water reservoirs. But the water has a very high specific heat capacity.
Okay.
Which means if you have 1 cubic centimeter of water, it will absorb, I believe it's 1 calorie of water to make it boil. But that water is going to stay there as water, just absorbing all this heat. And then as the night cools, it will release that heat back into the air.
Okay.
And
so the tree itself is warmer?
Yes.
Okay.
And because of the water.
Okay.
And so the water is the primary defining factor which modulates the temperature around it.
That's fascinating.
Because of this need for an older member of the species, a lot of animals specifically will imprint on another member of the species. This shows up most when humans are involved because we tend to find that thing interesting and we don't just eat the animal like other species might. So in my story, I imagined what if another sapient alien species landed on Earth? And I had these 3 baby aliens imprint on a young human. Okay,
so that, I just wasn't able to read far enough. I didn't know if he spawned these things or he's the father or because... Adopted, okay.
Yeah. But for where they came from, I envisioned a species with a very complex reproductive cycle where the female of the species actually implants in the ground and becomes a more sessile organism like a tree and then buds their young. And to maintain the sapient aspects, because one of the limitations that is commonly imposed on sapient creatures in fiction is that they have to be a physically motile species. Because one of the defining characteristics of sapiens is to alter your environment deliberately. And the prevailing concept is that if you're sessile, you can't do that. The way that most science fiction authors get around that, myself included, is to take the concept of the... Are you familiar with the mycorrhizae that grow under the forest?
Yeah.
A communications network comprised that goes under the substrate, allowing for a certain form of, not exactly telepathy, because there is physical connection there.
Right.
So how these organisms are born is that the female progenitor, goes sessile, becomes a tree, and buds her offspring. And I envision the male progenitors remaining motile as sort of a protective defense of the sessile partner.
I'm a writer. I've got a couple of books out. I've not attempted science fiction, and I think that's why. That's one reason why. You guys, and I put you in this whole Robert Heinlein, the whole group, have such imaginations. And so a part of that I know is your imagination, but it's part of it, it sounds like at least elements of that you've drawn again on your education.
Yes, everything's connected.
Sure.
I'm sure you've done the writing exercise where it's very common, that's a very common suggestion if you have writer's block, take the two most different people you can and put them together.
Right.
And then you have to imagine, why are these two vastly different people interacting with each other? Then it's a really good cure for writer's block, because if you have these people in your head and you put them together, they're going to interact.
Right.
And for those of us who write science fiction, we've just taken that method and we're like, well, what if this tree could talk?
It doesn't have to be people.
And what if it was in this situation?
Right.
Then what would happen? Are you familiar with game theory? The concept that a programmer can write a program that will behave as an organism and then put it in the computer with another program, and they'll interact.
Okay.
That's one type of game theory that's used. And one of the theories that psychologists propose is that consciousness itself, but storytelling especially, is a type of game theory practice that existed before we had computers. So your brain can take two concepts, put them together, and so your thoughts can go out and make choices and take actions, and then this thought being dies because it was a stupid idea, and you don't have to die.
Right.
And then you can say, well, that was a stupid idea, I'm not going to do that. And I think that's kind of what science fiction, especially speculative fiction, is at its core.
Okay. I've heard that we get to do, well, in fact, dreaming, as an example of that, is that we get to try out these things without harmful consequences. You can breathe underwater, or you can fly or jump off a building or something, and you go, well, that's dumb, that didn't work, but then you wake up and you're okay again. Is that kind of the same? In other words, is the writing a dream that we enter with you, the author?
I suppose it kind of is, because I don't always have a choice or control over where the story goes.
I wanted to ask you about that too.
And it's like, I am very, what's the term? Dedicated to the empirical method.
Okay.
On a very
and you would be.
Substructure level.
Right.
Part of the nature that drew me to be a scientist.
Right.
And so once I've told and established a story in my head and written it down, it's very, very hard for me to make changes.
Sure.
Well, it's one of the reasons I probably don't write as many rough drafts as other authors, because once I've written it down, it's hard for me to change that, because
it's pretty solid.
That's what it is.
Uh-huh.
And I think I mentioned last time with my story, Dying Embers, it is a tragedy. I did not start that story thinking it was going to be a tragedy.
Okay.
It was just, I had these characters and I put them together, and that's what happened.
Okay.
And there are many cultures in which the creative process is the muse. You have a muse.
Sure.
Or you have a jinn or a genius. And it's not you, it's outside of you, and it's working through you.
Does it feel like that sometimes?
Yeah, sometimes it feels like the story exists and I'm just transcribing it.
Yeah.
Sometimes
you've discovered it.
Sometimes
uncovered
it's
it.
the complete opposite. It's
Okay.
just this massive clay, and I'm having to work it and develop it, and I have to kind of get it going in a general direction.
Yeah.
Then it starts rolling, and who knows where it's going to wind up.
Right.
The creative process.
Well, it sounds to me like if I had to classify your writing based on what you've told me, it would fall into literary. And the reason it would be literary is because it's character-driven, not plot-driven. So you say you start with, you take these divergent characters and put them together, and it's this chemistry, this thing that's bubbling in between them. And it sounds like, motivate where it goes, as opposed to you say, I want you to end up there, and darn it, I'm going to get you there, even if you don't want to go.
To some degree, yes.
Okay.
Sometimes my creative process takes so long that sometimes I forget where I started.
I understand.
But like for Dying Embers, there was a certain scene that I knew that was very clear in my head.
Okay, sure.
Where two characters were sitting there interacting in a very specific way, and I built the story to that scene. But it was more like a discovery process. How would these characters get to that scene? And that seemed to flow quite organically.
Okay, sure. Okay. I think you said this, and I'm not just attributing it to you, that sometimes you don't know. In other words, you don't know the end of the story. Did you say that, or am I misinterpreting?
I quite could have said that.
Okay, because, and again, I've said this so many times, but John Irving, the famous author, says the first thing he writes is the last sentence of the story. So that, he said, it's like putting up a target so that you can aim at it, so that you know where you're going. Now, I heard an interview with him one time where he said, I'm writing this book, and this is the last sentence of the story. Well, he said it, and months later, in fact, the book came out, I got it, I read it, and that wasn't the last sentence. And in fact, it really didn't have anything to do with it. But I think his process, the comfort of at least fooling yourself into thinking that you know. And, you know, I think so often, even people who are meticulous plotters, sometimes those darn characters just take off on their own and you go, oh, well, okay, I guess we're going over here.
Yep. Yeah, that's been my experience.
That has happened to you.
Yeah.
Well, tell me, I know that you're busy. In fact, before we started here, you were talking about your domicile is sort of where you're working at the moment. How does that affect your writing schedule and allow you time to write? You just make it happen.
Whatever your job is, whatever your schedule is, you prioritize what's important to you.
Okay.
And most of the creative process goes on in my head.
So you're kind of working on it all the time anyway?
All the time. Driving, working.
Yeah.
I work 10 hours a day doing much of science is very dull, boring, and repetitive.
Okay.
And my brain just takes off. I've actually had
somewhere else.
Multiple employers over time telling me that I look so happy, but it's very clear that as I'm doing the job, but my brain's not there.
Yeah,
so
right.
Most of the creative work, the plot development, the character development goes on in my head while my hands are doing something else.
So then when at the end of the day or whatever, you sit down and you're almost transcribing what you already know.
Yes.
Okay. And
sometimes if I get an idea that's super important,
yeah,
I'll whip out a notepad and write it down
so
I don't lose it.
Yeah. And for folks maybe who are thinking about writing, that's real common to have I had a class with a fellow who was a screenwriter and a director, and he would use 3x5 cards, and you know, a pocket full of those, and then the notes throughout the day, and then he had a filing system, and it could be plot points or character development or scene setting, whatever, and then he would put that card, and he said when he would get stuck, he'd go through and, oh yeah, I remember that. So that's one thing. The other thing I want to talk to you about is you have such terrific illustrations, like the cover of your book. In fact, maybe we can get it up there. But I think I know how you collaborated on that, but talk a little bit about that.
When I started writing, it was kind of a last-ditch effort to save my writing skill because I realized I was 2 years out of college and I could write a perfect technical report any season of the year, but I realized that I'd lost the ability to string two coherent paragraphs together creatively.
Okay.
And I set myself a strict schedule and I was going to write so many paragraphs a day, and that did not work. But I found an online writing group.
Oh, okay.
And I was able to get feedback, and that was really exciting. And through this group, I got in touch with a Korean artist, and she was just starting out, and I was just starting out, and I had an idea, and she seemed to really, really like working with me because I'm used to dealing with people who with English as a second language, and I know how to speak coherently in very short sentences, believe it or not. And so we collaborated on this first project, and she said, she was busy, but she said, I'd really like to collaborate with you again. And so when I needed an illustrator, I went to her, and she did this wonderful illustration of my main character, Bard, shape-shifting silicon-based life form there. And I wanted her to draw it, so I sent her a picture of a bear and a pangolin.
A pangolin?
Pangolin. It's a highly armored anteater type animal.
Is that real?
Yes, its hair has been modified into basically giant scales. Think a slightly spikier armadillo.
Okay.
But I wanted that for the crystal ridges that go down the bear's back.
Yeah.
And so we were able to communicate like that, and I've gotten I think 5 illustrations done by her.
Okay.
And she's currently working on one for me right now for my short story collection.
Right.
That I did an insect-based alien. And I generally go to her for anything that's either mechanical or more segmented, because she's very good at technical art. I generally go to other artists for people or anything that's more organic.
Okay. And when you say you go to them, this is all online?
All online.
You've never physically met these people?
Nope.
Yeah.
We haven't even been on the same continent.
Okay. Now, I'm going to say her name wrong, but Yulia, is that her, your illustrator?
Yes.
Okay. And I don't know that you know how to say it.
Maybe I have no idea how to pronounce her name.
Okay, all right.
Whenever I think of her by her screen name, which is ERA 7, ERA 7.
ERA 7, okay.
Which is her company name, so.
Okay. And Korean, is that?
I believe so,
Okay.
Yes.
Now, Richard Wong, he was your editor?
Yep.
Or is your editor?
I never met the guy.
Okay.
The publisher hooked me up with him.
Okay.
He's in the same time zone, that's all I know.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, he was really great. He seemed utterly befuddled by the fact that I listened to his advice. And I was kind of startled by, I'm paying you to
Why would I not listen?
To fix my deficiencies,
Right.
which I am keenly aware of.
Right.
Why would I not listen? And
Right.
he just seemed kind of surprised by that. I guess most authors are more proprietary about alterations, but my grammar is quite frankly terrible at times, and especially when it comes to punctuations, and I'm grossly over-enthusiastic about commas. So,
you will know this author, and it escapes me at the moment, but he wrote, Jurassic Park and so on, The Great Train Robbery. In any event, he's passed away now, but I said, I think he went to Costco and bought a pallet load of commas and just kind of sprinkled them in there. They're everywhere. So, and not that I'm good at it, but I know that there is an overuse.
yeah.
So anyway, Richard Wong, and actually, I think you've answered this, but I was going to ask, how did you find working with him? And so was there a lot of back and forth, or you sent him the thing and he marked it up and sent it back and you said, oh, fine?
I sent him my manuscript,
Okay.
and most word processors have a function where you can, when you turn it on, you can see where the edits were made.
Right, yep.
And he sent it back, I think it was 5 separate chunks he sent my manuscript back in.
Okay.
So it was a smaller, more manageable process than doing the whole manuscript at once.
Okay.
And I sent him the manuscript, and he'd send me back one of these chunks at a time.
Okay.
And then I'd make the corrections, say, okay, this change is good. No, I can't budge on this one. That's too core to the story. And then I'd send that back to him.
Right. So I wanted to ask you about that too. So this is, there's punctuation and grammar. That's one thing. But you, as the author, the voice and the movement and the characters, you develop the characters. So I would think that that's the area, if you had a disagreement, that's where it would be.
The only point of contention that I didn't budge on, are you aware of the sandy-haired detective problem?
No, tell me about that.
One of the key concepts in writing that was taught for a very long time and got ingrained in new writers was don't be repetitive.
Okay.
Don't use said too many times.
Okay.
And don't call your character the same thing too many times. You have to swap it up.
Okay.
And so in the pulp fiction genre, which was the hard-boiled detective genre for a while,
right.
They took that advice too much to heart, as many authors did. And kind of the overcorrections spread through the writing community,
mm-hmm.
and up to this day. So where most writing instructors are still actively correcting it, pick 1 or 2 different ways to describe your character and stick to it.
Okay, okay.
And I had imbibed that overcorrection, as well as many in my generation.
Yeah.
And so the editor had to say, no, no, you will call him, pick one. Do you want to call him the young man, the raven-haired youth?
Right.
Whichever descriptor you use, you have to stick to it, and whichever variation of a name. Because when you have a character, say, Dr. Benjamin Grimes, you're going to want to refer to him as the Dr. Benjamin, Ben, Grimes, Dr. Grimes, Mr. Grimes.
Yeah.
Pick two.
Right.
And I said, well, that's really good advice, and for most of the characters, I can stick to that, for all the secondary characters. But the names of the characters were kind of a defining plot point in the book.
Okay.
And the fact that these characters used, specifically the two main characters, used different names at different times to indicate how their relationship to their environment.
Sure.
And I buckled down that one. I said, this looks like that common error that most authors do, but it's actually a plot point, a very critical plot point that shows the emotional state of the characters, how they're thinking of themselves, much better than any more complex description I could. And that was our only point of contention.
Okay, so I heard that said a different way. And that was, instead of the sandy-haired detective, I heard the elongated yellow fruit. And you've heard that too?
No, I haven't.
Okay, so when you say, if you're talking about a banana, and you've repeated the word banana so many times, you're thinking, how else can I say this? Well, it's the elongated yellow fruit. And you want to be careful of that. The other thing that, and this is not a disagreement, it's just a different look at it, is in a class that I had, when people would use other attributes rather than said, and he demurred or whatever it is, what happens is, as a reader, or this is the way it was explained to me, as a reader, it is so common and we're so used to that we don't really focus on it. But when you start to use these tricky alternatives, they stop you, and then you do pay attention, and so I was told, just go ahead and say said and move on.
Yeah.
And the other thing was, picking names, my teacher said it's the Darryl Strawberry problem. Darryl Strawberry is a real person. His name really is Strawberry. But it's so odd that, again, it stops you. So when you're naming your characters, be careful that it isn't so clever that it stops the flow of the action. So there we go.
When I'm thinking up names for characters, occasionally there's a name a character has to have. It's important. It's important to the story for some reason. But otherwise, for 90% of my character names, I go to Google and I Google the most top 100 common surnames, and I generally pick one out of the top 20.
Okay.
For any, because I know who the character is, I know their ethnicity, their cultural background.
That's important. Yep.
And then I go into Google, type in the parameters, and it spits out census data from. I was actually Googling bronze. I was writing a story set in the Bronze Age. Well, backstory was set in the Bronze Age.
Okay.
And I needed names from that era, and the internet did not disappoint.
This is terrific. We're going to run out of time, and I've got about 16 more things that I wanted to talk to you about. Super quick, Flying Sparks. Is that?
Yes, that's my second book I'm working on.
Okay.
I'm having a little bit of trouble finding an editor.
Okay.
I had an editor, but he seems to have disappeared off the face of the earth and hasn't gotten back to me, and I haven't found him again.
And not Richard?
No.
Okay.
The company that I did publish the original book for is shifting their business practice, and they've sort of freed me up to go do my own thing.
Okay.
So I'm on my own for this next one, so I'm going to be self-publishing it.
Okay.
And I'd finished that manuscript and sent it to the editor and shifted my focus to my anthology.
Okay.
And I need to find a new editor.
Okay. So to wrap up, Betty, you've got a website?
Yes.
BettyAdams.com?
AuthorBettyAdams.com.
In fact, I actually looked you up that way. So folks, go to that website. There's some neat stuff there. And you have a blog as well.
I do.
Okay, and how did we find that?
It's Betty Adams Tall Tales. It's also on the website, AuthorBettyAdams.com.
Okay, so it's a link, and,
Yeah.
and they can go there. A lot of fun stuff. Darn it, we need more time. Thank you for coming. Thank you for coming.
You.
Folks, that's it for this time. Write to me so I don't feel so lonely. StephenWLong.com is my website. You can check out the books, and in fact, we have links to these shows. So I guess we'll just see you next time. Thanks so much.
What do you think? We done?
I don't know. You guys want to do one just with yourself without me doing the
think we're done. If
No,
they got
no.
enough. They got enough.
They got enough? Probably. Okay, sounds good.
Let's go lunch.
Oh,
I'm hungry.
Yeah.
yeah, I can just bite too.